Hi there. Thanks for listening. I'm going to continue on this podcast, the temple of the dangerous holy woman, and I'm going to be doing things around the house because that's when I have time. I kind of have to do these recordings when I can, and so to recap a little bit about what I've been talking about, what the purpose of this podcast is. So, please be sure to listen to the other sections of this podcast to get a fuller understanding of what is going on here. Who is the dangerous holy woman? The dangerous holy woman is Ava. Ava, who is the original woman, the first mother, the original woman who has been represented for millions of years, since time out of mind, since human origins, through literally probably hundreds of thousands of motifs throughout human history. And she is the embodiment of the sacred feminine that gave birth to all things, as are all women. And the time has come. For now, a couple of decades, quite a few decades, a time came in which the Holy Feminine her presence on earth has become more and more obvious. She's always been here. She is the creator of all things, with the support and fertilization of the masculine aspect of the universe, the yang part of the universe, but she is all things. All things came from her, but her presence on earth has been resurrected more and more fully in the last quite a few decades now. And with that, the holy presence, importance, and origins of the first mother, the first woman, Ava, who is represented all the way since time out of mind throughout human history, as in many, 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 even hundreds of thousands of motifs, such as Shiva, the goddess Shiva, Diana, and the ancient Far Eastern goddesses of compassion, love, mercy, war, and healing. She has also been represented in the pre-Christian motif symbol of the Black Madonna, and both the indigenous and Christian motif of the Brown Madonna, known throughout the world by literally probably over 1 billion people throughout the world as Virgin de Guadalupe. I have many names for her. My sort of official name for her, if she has an official name, but my sort of official name for her is Mo De Song Hom. And these are the Hanja characters, the Korean characters. Mo, mother. De is the character for one of the 5 sacred and ancient mountains of China, the temple to the Holy Mother, recognized in the Far East, that part of the world. So Mo De, mother, sacred mountain temple. Song, sacred. Home. Now, home means danger, but more specifically, it means strategic pass. So, the holy way, the sacred way, has always been throughout history. Human history has always been a dangerous pass. But holy people throughout history, awakened people throughout history, people who have heard the voice of divinity, have known that it is through, our best chances are through this pass. And not many people are able to go this path in completeness. But some have. And it is a dangerous path because the world has been dominated by the egoic forces or the predatory forces, and divinity has had to be fought for throughout history, has had to be kept alive throughout history. And so the strategic paths, the sacred strategic path, the sacred dangerous path. So my name for her is Mother of the Sacred Dangerous, Mother Temple of the Sacred Dangerous Path. So Temple of the Dangerous Holy Woman, in other words. And my work with her surrounds the resurrection, healing, and renewal, rebirth of indigenous identity and indigenous legacy. She is the indigenous woman. She is not an indigenous woman. She is the indigenous woman. I am an indigenous Asian woman. The idea or understanding of indigenous has been very watered down, spread thin, even corrupted. And I go through that in the previous section, and especially in the postmodern age, and starting with, as far as I can see, the sexual revolution, the hippie era, and the sort of not just opening. There was a lot of positive things that came to the West through that opening, through the freeing aspects of the hippie era, but then it also soon collapsed and dissolved into a culture, a self-serving culture that is severed from the ancestors, severed from original indigenous identity. And last but not least, and I will go over as a little recap, and again, be sure to listen to the previous sections for more clarity. The indigenous identity has three main pillars, and the three main pillars have literally kept humanity moving forward throughout 2 million years of human history. No matter what brutality, what raising, what annihilation, what psychological or emotional raising or annihilation or physical annihilation has happened. These three pillars have literally of indigenous legacy have kept humanity moving forward. The three pillars are that of the soul. The soul is in service to unconditional love and natural law. The second that springs out of that original heart, or in Korean we'd say 심장, is the family, the sanctity of the biological family, and then springing out of that the sanctity and the absolute necessity of lineage, of the protection and preservation of the lineage. Understanding one's origins, one can literally trace one's origins to become a fuller and more whole and healed individual, and by extension heal their family, their nation, and their worlds through being able to follow the powerful lines of lineage. That if you follow all the way back, deep within yourself, first and foremost, deep within yourself, you will literally stumble, maybe stumble, I don't know, come upon the one love, the original love, and the power and the ancientness of natural law, and the power of natural law, and how we belong to natural law and not the other way around. So today I'm going to be talking about annihilation, the annihilator and annihilation, and the healing through my work with the indigenous woman, Eva, the original mother, Umma Nobara, and I'm going to be talking about my work with her and the ancient rhythms that need to be sought, that need to be played, that need to be danced, that need to be sung over the bones of the annihilated. Something that I do go over a little bit, or quite a bit actually, in the other sections is the origins of Western colonization. And the origins go back a little further than this, but this is basically when the full impact of Western colonization took hold and annihilated the indigenous identity of Europe, the indigenous legacy of Europe, and then spread all over the world. And it is through understanding this occurrence that we begin to understand what must be done in this modern age, what good things have come out despite atrocity, but yet what bones of the annihilated we have left to literally suffer in agony, in order that Western only agendas can be of importance in this world. Just around 800 years ago, in the rising of the Catholic Church and the Inquisition, over 300 years and more, the Inquisition and the Catholic Church tried, burned, tortured, tormented, petrified, and finally buried and annihilated millions, up to millions of women and some men. But many people have heard about the burnings of witches, but it's been very much dramatized and watered down and forgotten. And these women were accused of heresy, of dark magic, when actually this occurrence is just another cycle, was just another cycle that plays into today. It continues to play in today within our psyches and even within our physical lives. The ancient voice, agenda, and actions of the ancient annihilator, the ancient predator. The ancient predator is not as ancient as divinity, but certainly is as ancient as human origins. And after millions, basically it was considered a cleansing of Europe from the dirtiness, from what was considered the dirtiness and the impurity and even evil of indigenous practices that literally up to that point, or literally had been around since time out of mind, since human origins. In particular, the recognition of the goddess and the recognition of the goddess' first daughter, Eva, and our love, our ancient and deep love for her. And that became literally razed to the ground. And I will repeat again that I would never, ever want this podcast to be about what has become very popular at this time, as this shitting on Christians and Christian identity, religious identity, and Christian faith. I have a very deep love for the Christian faith and Christian people. My one side of my heritage is actually very deeply Christian. My ancestors directly came from the Mayflower, and when I really think about it, those two people, that man and woman that I am descended from, quite literally populated the first colony. They most of the people that came on the Mayflower were killed due to starvation and sickness. And if it really wasn't for the indigenous people of this land, they would not have survived. And not only that, my ancestors had 10 children, so most of them were killed, and then my ancestors survived and they had 10 children. Then it can be safely said that they literally almost single-handedly populated the first colony. So that's my white side, that's my European side, which I have become so devoted throughout my life in healing and understanding, and which is why I did so much research and was tormented by the forgotten reality, the forgotten atrocity of the European wise women and the razing to the ground of European indigenous identity. I was tormented as a child. I'm from Salem, Massachusetts. Most people know Salem, Massachusetts as the dramatized, the sensationalized, a place where people go to, visit the witches place, the spooky place, and I have made it one of my life's commitments to build a memorial to these women and to educate people about the reality of what actually happened, which was basically a micro, I don't want to say micro because I don't want to diminish it, but it was a smaller version of the atrocity that happened in Europe that I just explained through the Inquisition. And the Inquisition basically happened within the little city of Salem, and probably more like town back then. As a child, I was tormented by the unhealed, I guess the tormented spirits of these women, and it became clear throughout my life that the reason why I was tormented so was because I am called to be a channel for the original mother, who is here to help all of us, who has seen everything, who is at the headwaters, who was the first woman to experience such torment, and therefore understands deeply our torment. And not only our torment, but our relearning of the steps to divinity, and therefore through a world of such agony, and yet she is a song home, the sacred dangerous pass, strategic pass. Suffice it to say, there is no memorial to these women, and a couple of men who were murdered, literally tortured and murdered, in the name of purification. And there's no memorial to them in all of Salem, just sensationalized stories and tourism, basically. So Ava's story is most famously told in the biblical sense over the last 800 years of European Christian history. Yes, it is more ancient than that, but it is most famously told in the European Christian tradition as the book of, basically the first story in the book of Genesis. And it is told this one way, and there's nothing wrong innately with the story that is told in the Bible. And again, I said this before in my previous sections, that that the Bible is a sacred and holy book. I have a deep love for the Scripture, but I would like, if you're listening to, and you're continuing to listen, to see the Bible not only as important and sacred, if you have thrown it out as not so, but it is, but also that it is more than that, that it is not an isolated book. It's one. It's it is scripture that has literally lasted thousands of years, and of people who wrote their testimonies. And just because there has been an interpretation in the Bible that, yes, has caused, in some cases, incredible, unspeakable agony in the indigenous cultures of the world. In spite of all that, the soul found a way through it. And I actually have quite a deep love for the Catholic tradition. And I really think it's because, as much as the Catholic tradition, so much of it likes to say that they are purified from the indigenous, they were the first empire really to take over the Roman Catholic Church. Much as they like to say, so much of it like to say, oh, we were purified from the pagans, and we're just Christian, and we just worship Christ, the only identity, divine identity that there is and there should be. And as much as that tends to be a narrative within the Catholic faith, I don't know. I was not raised Catholic, and a lot of people in the faith that I was raised in, they think that just like every religious organization, they think, oh, we have the one truth and the only way. Okay, yeah. You have the one truth, but not the only way to the one truth. And the point is that the soul finds a way to awaken people in spite of atrocity, in spite of whatever happens, to awaken people and to give new expressions of the truth. And the point isn't to amputate the rest. The point is to welcome death. That is the other side of life, so that there can be rebirth in the cyclical nature of ancient religious and cultural rites, rituals, and passages. Okay. And I have such a love for the Catholic faith because if you look at what happened to the women in Europe, spanning back just around 500 to 800 years ago, despite all of that, it's incredible what happened. How the Madonna, no matter what, the holy woman, the feminine, sprung out of that faith anyway. In so much of Christian tradition, the Holy Mother, the Madonna and Child, which is an ancient motif that first represented the first woman, because the foundational force in the universe is the mother and the child. The point is, in spite all of this that happened, it is incredible that, as I was saying before, as I was saying, there are many sects of Christianity, and I've studied and experienced firsthand many of them, and really there isn't any that loves and understands the Madonna and Child force as much as the Catholic Church. And I understand that the Catholic Church still there are issues with even within the church, even being able to recognize that. But Catholics love the Holy Mother, the Holy Woman, who, yes, is represented in the biblical characters, ancient people of the Middle East, Mary or Maria or Miriam or Mia, as I call her sometimes, and Jesus, her son Jesus. And so I actually have a very deep love for the Catholic faith. But the story of the first woman, or the feminine, the young, innocent, naive feminine, and the predator, is an ancient story. It comes way before the Abrahamic faiths. Okay, way before that. You see it in mythology. One very famous one is Pandora's box. where Pandora, the young innocent maiden, opens the box, and she's told not to open the box, of course, and she opens it anyway, and she lets loose all the evils of the world. And then there's the stories of her capture, also in the Greek mythology, of Persephone being captured, for example, by Hades. And then there's the story of her capture in ancient folklore as well, that became famous maybe through the Brothers Grimm or Disney even later on, but the capture of the feminine and her need to relearn the steps back to reclaiming her divinity and overcoming the predator, and then becoming the warrior goddess that she is, to teach and guide other women, and therefore their children and their brothers and their mates, back to divinity, is an ancient story, an ancient motif. So once again, as I said before in the last sections, that we're going to reach back to an ancient time within ourselves, that in which the soul is a gateway to. And we're going to, if you're going to continue to listen and bear with me, and then we are going to do our best to lay down our intellect. Our intellect should be in service to a higher intelligence, that is the soul. And in especially postmodernism, the intellectual force has been given full reign, almost full reign, and disallows the understandings of the ancient ones. The stories for hundreds of years have been illegal. At first it was illegal literally, and now more it is illegal psychologically, to talk about our ancient origins in both the spiritual, psychological, as well as physical sense. So let's lay down our intellect and let the soul step forward as much as possible. The ancient story of the capture of the original feminine and the capture of the original daughter of the sacred feminine, of the goddess, is something that we see replayed. The ancient drama see replayed throughout our personal lives, both inwardly and outwardly, but also very, very much in society. Our postmodern sort of issues that we deal with, I want to talk about that happened really in my mother's and those whose parents are about that age, children of the 60s and the 70s, and the things, and then the things that happened after that, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and the things that happened that are, people think are, we say modernism, and it's or modern history, and something that I've come to learn throughout my life, and the cyclical natures of the drama of the sacred feminine being captured and then hurt and tormented and even annihilated, and then her resurrection and relearning of the steps through listening to the first faint drums of the ancient soul, and then the more she practices, the more she hears them, and back to the sacred. People, we talk about it as a modern thing, but something that I've come to learn is that it's really not so modern. It's actually ancient. The predator's voice, the predator's agendas, the predator's way, it might be sort of a complicated way, mixed up, tangled, warped way, sadistic way, but it's not very creative once you begin to understand the pattern, then it doesn't matter in what form the predator appears, either more feminine or masculine in nature. It doesn't matter. You begin to recognize it as you become more awake. In particular, I'm talking to women, but the torture and then freeing and healing of the original feminine, the sacred feminine, from which all things have come, all things are birthed from, and go back to in death, and then reborn again. This cyclical pattern, it plays differently in men as it does in women, and so I'm talking to women in particular, but there is a sacred pattern of the feminine in men as well, without healing the predatory patterns within men towards the sacred feminine, towards the mother nature, the original mother nature within male psyches, then and then within their personal lives, then the predatory force that plays through men cannot be healed. But I am specifically focusing on women at this time, and the predatory force can have be more masculine nature or feminine in nature, depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on the sex of the person. And I'm going to just roll up my sleeves, as I say, and get into some dirt, some filth, because that's how we heal. That is what we do when we heal. That is real healing. You want to know real healing? You gotta roll up your sleeves. You gotta get into the septic tank. Go dumpster diving, as we say. The holy dangerous way. The holy dangerous way is dumpster diving. Okay. So in the last 20 years or so, that sprang out of the sexual revolution, the roots of postmodernism. That came out of the 60s and the 70s. Just want to give you a little example of the predatory force narrative that took advantage and warped the opening that was happening during that time, the hope and the new vision that was happening at that time. And a lot of good came out of it, but we need to recognize the predatory force that also played through it. So just to give you some example, as the hippies, who are mostly European, people of European descent, as the hippies talked about love and love children and peace and make love not war and all that, during that time, during the protests and the Vietnam protests, and that were very famous, during these times when so we so-called just needed peace, and or a passive kind of peace, quote peace. I am Asian. I am of indigenous Asian descent, and have a deep and lifelong indigenous identity, and on the Asian continent, literally at the hands of people on the Asian continent, and as well as through the Western genders and philosophies. One of them most famously, even to this day, being communism, Marxism, literally was mowing down millions of people, slaughtering millions of people in the East, in Southeast Asia, but also in the Far East. And I've met people who lived through that. People from Cambodia, people from Vietnam, people from Korea, okay, and even in Japan as well. People who have lived through a literal modern annihilation. And to this day, descendants of the hippie generation have no idea what happened or what was happening. Literally, these very passive and neutered understandings of what peace is, what healing is, what resurrection and revival is live on today in our generation and in our millennial generation, and people literally have no understanding of what communism did and continues to do all the way through all the way throughout the world. So that's sort of giving you an idea of, as some people in the Western world preach the so-called peace-loving narrative, either turned a blind eye or just didn't know because they were being brainwashed otherwise. That across the ocean, literally millions of women, children, and men were being mowed down and slaughtered by communists and imperialists. So this is the warping, this is the predatory force that blocks the ears, the eyes, the senses of the naive and the innocent and the young and the zealous. And I say zealous in the most positive sense, in the enthusiastic, the energy of the young, and how the energy of the young can be used by the predatory force, manipulated by the predatory force. And as we know, the 60s and 70s generation descended into drugs, basically drugs and free sex, and there was a disintegration of the understanding of any fragment of what it means to have an indigenous value. Okay? And what that means is, as I said before, the indigenous understanding that I'm talking about has to do with the understanding that our origins are through and into the gateway that is the soul, that is in service to unconditional love and to natural law, the biological family, and the legacy of lineage. And literally after the 60s and 70s and the warping and the blinding and the misinformation that was a big part of raising our parents' generation, and any fragment of understanding of what it means to ultimately be rooted in the wisdom, legacy, lessons, and culture, religious rites and rituals of the ancestors in any kind of way was dissolved and annihilated. There are many ways to annihilate people, to annihilate a person. Annihilation happens first and foremost within the psyche and the spirit of a person. And it therefore then it spreads, within the family, nation, and finally the world. The annihilator's voice. If we look at the ancient drama that is the capture of the original feminine and her awakening and relearning of the steps back to divinity and finally freedom. If we look at the ancient motifs of this story, yes, that live within the Bible, but even way before that, way before the Abrahamic faiths, within the ancient stories of the ancient ones, since time out of mind. The predatory voice, literally, the predatory voice is impetus. The impetus behind the predatory force is that of the egoic nature, the self-centered nature. Now, I've come to understand throughout my life in my life experiences. This understanding has had to grow, has had many, many steps in its growth, and I'm sure many more steps to come. But the egoic nature is not in itself an evil nature. The ego is what I've come to understand or call it as the counter pole within the psyche. Human beings came to this earth to learn the steps towards divinity. And without free will, there is no true love. If we are instinctual beings, we are also we also have a free will that can choose to align with those foundational instincts that come straight from the soul, natural law, unconditional love. We can either choose to align to that, or we can choose ultimately capture. Yes? And so this ancient story of the original woman and her capture, we learn that there is a predatory force somehow that was there, that was present. In the beginning of human history, in our origins, there was a predatory force that became interwoven with the force of the ego. It cannot become interwoven with the soul. The soul is untouchable, okay? But the soul has to go underground. The soul has to, as I come to call, has to go down into the catacombs literally of the psyche, of the human being. The cosmic existence has to go down into the catacombs, because the soul cannot and does not tolerate the annihilator's agenda. It cannot. The soul is unconditional love, and the predatory force's agenda is that of pure egoic agenda. It is a self-centered viewpoint. Okay, it's a viewpoint that sees oneself as just an individual. Its desire is the here and the now, which, as we know, our self-help modern culture loves to say, be here and now, in the now, be in the now. Yes, absolutely. But that language can be warped as well. That language can be warped as well by the predatory egoic force. And the predatory egoic force sees the here and now as immediate desires. Okay, that the here and now don't exist as the gateway to the past and far into the future, deep into the past and far into the future. But the here and now exists as a self-serving moment, momentary desire, momentary need, momentary whatever.